Hello there.
What a political move to stick two fingers up at Suella Braverman.
Politics at Jack and Sam's is the podcast where we tell you what's going to happen next week in the wild world of Westminster.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico, and with me, as always, is the great Sam Coates of Sky News.
Keeping you ahead of the political agenda.
One top civil servant said to me they're 70-30 in favour of thinking something will happen as soon as Monday.
Sam, is it going to happen, yes or no?
Listen to Politics at Jack and Sam's wherever you get your podcasts.
Beth, what is your sort of favourite musical genre?
Northern Soul.
Is it? So why are you dressed as Adam and the Ants today?
This is my Elizabeth I blouse. And if anyone messes with me when I'm wearing it, I chop off their heads. Well, hello there. Now, the sun is out. I'm in the studio. Jess, you're in Birmingham.
It is very sunny here in Birmingham, and that's why I'm wearing a vest.
She's probably got bikini bottoms on. And Ruth, is it sunny up in Scotland?
It's close, I would say, up in Scotland, so we're all a bit sweaty.
This is electoral dysfunction, and it did feel this week like we were ramping up into election campaign mode after the local and the mayoral elections, and we're going to talk about what both Labour and Tories are planning after those. And we're also going to talk about the big collective gasp as Natalie Elphicke crossed the floor to Labour just before Prime Minister's questions. Jonathan Gullis, a Conservative MP, his face was a picture. He just couldn't quite believe what was unfolding before his eyes.
I think it was just sort of like, what's happening? And nobody from either side had any idea. So it was just confusion.
I know. Well, I sadly missed this electric moment because I was busily dealing with another Conservative. I was interviewing Robert Jenrick about migration. So I missed this Natalie Elphicke moment. But we're going to get on to all of that. Now, we have some more of your messages. You can WhatsApp voice note us on 07934 200 444, and the email is electoraldysfunction@sky.uk, because we're going to do another Answer the Question special in a couple of weeks, so send them in. Right, okay. So let's go straight to Natalie Elphicke. A big electoral dysfunction moment for the Tories on Wednesday, just before PMQs, when Natalie Elphicke, the Conservative MP for Dover, known for her very right-wing views, actually. She's not one of Ruth's wets, as Ruth self-designates, One Nationers. Oh, no. She's a new Conservative and a member of the ERG, both right-wing groupings. But anyway, she crossed the floor to Labour and she talked about illegal boat crossings and Rishi Sunak failing on this key policy. And of course, Dover is a massive hotspot for this problem. And she is in the line of fire, if you like, on this politically. Now, Jess, not everyone on your benches was delighted to welcome Natalie Elphicke. You included, I think that's fair to say. What's the mood in the party at the moment?
I mean, originally it was just shock. I mean, I found out about it because Gary Sambrook, the Tory MP in Northfield, texted me and he was like, now I know you've got something to say about Natalie Elphicke. And I wasn't in the chamber. I hadn't heard the news. I mean, in Westminster, you very rarely know what is actually going on in the news. You're meeting to meeting to meeting. I could miss the moon landing. And I was like, what? So initially, I was a bit shocked about it. And I thought I'd misunderstood. I have to say the Tories were sort of crowing about it, even though it seems like an electoral dysfunction to them. And certainly it is to Rishi Sunak, but quite a lot of, the rank and file, and certainly the wet lot, Ruth's gang, were sort of, pleased, which is an unusual reaction. But I have to say, my initial shock and what the hell, politics is weird and it makes you feel very tired when you have to sort of do a 180. I felt a bit sad, is the truth. This is a political moment that I get it. I get it. Totally. And actually the big headline is Tory walks the floor because she's unhappy with the boats and she's the Dover MP. Coup d'etat, got it. But I did just feel a little bit like there is more to this and it should have been handled in a way that was slightly more sensitive to those of us, certainly who speak up on these particular issues. So I just felt a little bit like it's a bit like being punched in the gut a little bit. I was a bit like, what? Hang on a minute.
Let's just explain, in case people don't really know who Natalie Elphicke is. She's quite a controversial figure. She took her Dover and Deal seat uncontested after her now ex-husband Charlie Elphicke was the MP there. He was convicted of sexual assault against 2 women and sentenced to 2 years in prison. She then took the seat. Now, Jess, there were all these issues around some of the things that she'd said about victims of sexual assault, basically, at the hands of her.
The specific ones in her husband's case, yeah.
What's interesting is you spoke out last night, and lo and behold, today, Natalie Elphicke has now made a statement, which I think is in the name of Natalie Elphicke, but I imagine was coming in a way from the leader's office, from the Labour Party, because probably they realised that the party management problem around this was becoming a big deal. She said in a statement that she released today that it was an incredibly stressful and difficult period for me as I learned more about the person I thought I knew. She also said, I know it was far harder for the women who had to relive their experiences and give evidence against him, that's her ex-husband. I have previously and do condemn his behaviour towards other women and towards me. It was right that he was prosecuted, and I'm sorry for the comments I made about his victims. It's vital that women can have confidence in the criminal justice system, and our rights of prosecution and conviction are far too low as a country. Keir Starmer's mission to halve male violence against women and girls is critical. I want to take the opportunity to express my explicit support for Labour colleagues working to realise it. Jess, I almost think that statement's written for you.
What I want to say on Natalie's statement, and maybe, I'm going to give her a chance to talk to me personally. There is a part of that statement that says the abuse and the harm that he caused to her as well. And what I know from all my years of training is that post the Me Too movement, we have become completely and utterly accepting that we all know victims. And that didn't used to be the case. It used to be the case that people would be like, oh, I don't know anyone this has happened to. But nowadays, we all recognise that we all know. And we're all sort of wear it as a badge of honour. The thing that the British public has not yet done is admit to themselves that they know and love perpetrators of this violence. And that is a much bigger step. It is a much harder thing for people to do. And if people think that they would tolerate somebody saying something about their loved one, or that they wouldn't have a reaction that they might then think was completely and utterly ugly, then they have never ever dealt with a case like this, because that is the majority reaction. Now, I'm not saying that to excuse her. I am saying that because I think that she provides us with a lesson of how we could actually prevent this going forward and have some sort of cultural shift. So I don't excuse her, and I will give her, like I would with any woman, I will give her a fair chance. But like I say, just saying sorry, and I do feel a little bit like that statement was written for me, and not just me, I have to say, by no means just me, but it does feel like it's an apology. But it's not me she needs to apologise to.
What I meant by that was that you were the only one really that publicly raised questions, and you weren't highly critical. You raised questions that I know lots of people were privately feeding back. I mean, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because in a way, for Starmer, if you zoom out a bit, you've got Dan Poulter, another Conservative MP, 11 days ago or 12 days ago, crossing the floor of the House, defecting to Labour, saying, I want to defect because the Tories are failing on the NHS. And then you have Natalie Elphicke saying, I'm crossing the floor because the Tories are failing on migration. In the big picture, the meta-narrative, you'd think, tick, tick. But this wasn't a slam dunk, was it? I mean, this was more complicated. Do you think Starmer et al. Didn't sort of anticipate the sort of backlash that they were going to get?
Well, if they didn't, then they need to get to know their party a little bit better. Certainly the women in their party, because, the level of due diligence on that would have been a Google search. But I understand that it's hard to do party management when you're keeping a secret like that. I can totally understand. And it would have leaked. There's absolutely no two ways about it. It would have leaked had we all been informed and spoken about and tried to deal with this. I do often say to people, even in selections, and now we're in this era of defections, that, I promise discretion if you just come to me, because I do know most of the stories about people, and I'll sit like a Roman emperor doing a yay or nay. I am more than happy to offer that service to any political party.
Yeah, there is such a thing as quality control.
Quality control. I mean, let's go straight to the quality control of this, because Natalie Elphicke would not have been, if you survey your Conservative colleagues down in Westminster, Natalie Elphicke would not have been the Conservative that you would have put top of the list of risk of defection to Labour, huh?
Well, no, and when I heard that it had happened, I had like 5 or 6 thoughts all at once, like all jumbled in my head. The first was... I mean, because sometimes, and I've had this in my own party in Scotland, where somebody has been quite troublesome and troubling to many people within the party and then goes and joins a different party. And yes, you're all supposed to feel bad about it, but actually secretly you're a bit like, well, that's somebody else's problem now. So that was kind of thought one. The second thought was, like, I've still never kind of worked out how, given the way the case against her husband went, how she ended up being selected as the candidate in the same seat by the same constituency party, to be honest. That's always been a bit of a mystery to me.
She was unopposed, Ruth.
The third one was, isn't she the person that was really mean about Marcus Rashford being nice to kids that don't get school meals because he missed a penalty? And as somebody whose second team, whose English team is Man United, that had kind of logged in my brain. And then the other part of it was, what on earth does Diane Abbott have to do to get the whip back in the House of Commons for the Labour Party? Lifelong Labour activist and stalwart Diane Abbott is still not a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party. So what on earth does she have to do to get in if Natalie Elphicke is welcomed with open arms? And then point 5 was just, God, we're at the end of days now. Like, this is absolutely a party falling apart in front of your eyes. The fact that people are crossing the floor at PMQs to extract maximum damage, and somebody saying that I don't think the Tories are going far enough on stopping the boats, so I'm going to join Labour. I mean, that's just kind of... And then the last thing, so I think I'm up to 7 points now, but the last
You're number 6, I'm writing them down.
What has she been offered? Like, what's she getting for this? What has she extracted for this? Because this is incredibly embarrassing to Rishi Sunak. She's doing it in the way to extract maximum damage. What is she getting?
So... on the Marcus Rashford thing, this was about, as you rightly point out, she was very rude about him missing a penalty and said if he hadn't have been so political, then maybe he wouldn't have missed the penalty. To which Rachel Reeves told her to, and I'm obviously not allowed to use this word on the podcast, one of you two are. So Rachel Reeves told Natalie Elphicke in a podcast, apparently, to F off. Rachel Reeves! I mean, that's the most racy thing I've ever heard her do.
Can I just say, though, if somebody from my own side had said that, right, I would also tell them to fuck off.
To be fair, Jess, there is a lot lower for you telling people to fuck off.
Yeah, it's so un-Rachel Reeves to tell someone to publicly F off, isn't it?
The bar is low, yeah, that is true for me, but it's high bar for Rachel, yeah.
It's a high bar. But I've got a serious question on this, though, Ruth, and it brought me back to something we discussed the other week. Embattled versus beleaguered. What's the adjective now? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I think to have somebody cross the floor on one of the policies that you're struggling the hardest with at PMQs, I mean, I think we're tripping into beleaguered territory. I think we're encroaching on beleaguered.
I feel like I need a Sky News break jingle there. Ruth Davidson calls it for beleaguered now. I'll tell you what, it's a shifting sands now,
I mean,
it?
I don't know where I'm going to get to by the time this election comes in November or whenever it is. I mean, beleaguered could be in the rearview mirror by then. I mean, it could be...
Hang on, where do you go in battle beleaguered to what's the next one?
I mean, apocalypse. Apocalyptic.
So, Ruth, what did you say? What, you can be in battle, but if you're beleaguered...
You're fucked.
Okay. So you're calling it?
Well, I think
calling it for beleaguered.
Pretty close. I mean, there are nosedives that is hard to pull out of, and I think we discussed at length in last week's podcast the election results and the mayoral results, and yeah, I mean, it's looking like a nosedive that even the finest fighter pilot could never pull out of.
I just have one other thought that I want to put to you both. Something that struck me about all of this was my phone was alight with quite a lot of unhappiness, and that's a polite way of putting it, about this decision by Starmer to welcome Natalie Elphicke into the party, given some of the things we've discussed, and politically how right-wing she is and how rude she's been actually about Starmer, Mr. Softy, really critical quite recently, right? But for all the sort of anger behind the scenes, Jess, apart from you kind of saying it raises questions and a couple of other people saying a little bit, the party kept a lid on it, right? It was quite an interesting sort of example of party management. Because you're right, Ruth, you brought up the issue of Diane Abbott, and people messaged me going, how is it that Natalie Elphicke gets to be in and Diane Abbott still hasn't got... People are furious about it, especially on the left of the party. But somehow Starmer is keeping a lid on it. Is it literally because people are so focused on wanting to win a general election that they're all just falling into line? What's going on?
Yeah, that is what's happening. I mean, you don't want to be deemed as being selfish in those circumstances. And also the Labour Party, you know, when it's making decisions that seem so fleet of foot and not risk averse, which we're so used to the sort of Starmer operation being referred to as being risk averse, Ming Vars and all that, when it makes decisions like the one it has made this week on Natalie Elphicke, there's a level of ruthlessness there that will come for you as well. So there's a bit of, you know, if you go mental on the Labour Party, maybe they wouldn't let you stand. I don't think that they would do that, but that will be in the back of people's minds. But fundamentally, it's much less cynical than that, is that people believe at the moment in the Labour Party that the Labour government would be better for the country, genuinely. And that has to be their focus.
So for somebody, you know, who was deeply conflicted in 2019 at the election about Boris Johnson as a potential Prime Minister, and I wouldn't not put myself in that category, and was pretty outspoken at the time, the choice between him as Prime Minister or Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister, it was a really easy one to make. And that's for somebody like me who's barely said a kind word about Boris Johnson's suitability for the office of Prime Minister, because on foreign policy alone, he's not dangerous in the way that I believed Jeremy Corbyn was. You know, I completely believe that people that are in the Labour Party and are elected Labour members will have their minds focused by the idea that at this election, my God, we might actually get the Tories out, you know, and they might be saying that to themselves.
Let's go back to end of days. We've had the big election losses, Tory defections, and very public internal detractors. And this week it was the turn of none other than Robert Jenrick. We had Suella Braverman at the weekend. I love that every time I mention the guy, Ruth either laughs or shakes her head. I would like to just say that the reason that I am bringing up Robert Jenrick is because you have terrible election results. Suella Braverman comes out, she goes on Laura Kuenssberg's show on the BBC. She says quite a lot of things that are pretty unpleasant and pointed about the Prime Minister. She says, you know, I wish I'd never backed him, and says he's got to change course, but it's quite a kind of personal attack, if you like. Jenrick does it in a different way, which is he comes out 3 or 4 days later, both of them with the same target, which is trying to appeal to Conservative members. But what Jenrick does is he comes out with a guy called Neil O'Brien, who is a think tanky guy, also an MP, former health minister. And they put out a really big report about legal migration. So Jenrick is trying to make his leadership pitch, but he's doing it via policy ideas around immigration. And he talks about getting immigration back down to the tens of thousands. Now, Ruth, he talks about that being a mainstream Conservative view. He talks about how this was a David Cameron project into a Theresa May project. I sort of point out to him that, yeah, you can argue that on legal migration, that you are in the mainstream of where the Conservative Party was. But what you cannot disguise or indeed argue against is that what you want to do on illegal migration, on stop the boats and withdrawing, if necessary, from the European Convention of Human Rights is very much on the right of the party. But, you know, he's framing the migration argument from the mainstream. I think we've got a bit of what he said to me. Should we play that out?
Well, these were appalling local election results. Let's not beat around the bush. And they point towards a very serious defeat for the government at the general election unless we can change course and win back some of those Conservative voters who are currently not supporting us or are drifting to reform, who performed very well in the local elections.
Ruth, reform, performing well in local elections, we've got to stop the drift. You know, you've heard this record played over and over again on repeat. This is the direction of the party. Do you agree with him in any way whatsoever?
Well, look, I think that there are actually some sensible suggestions that aren't crazy in what he's suggesting in terms of looking at legal migration. I think the issue is that the concerns that are being raised by people who are concerned about immigration is that it's not legal migration that they're worried about. I'm not entirely sure that that solves the problem that he says he's also solving, which is the drift to reform. I think he was certainly much more reasonable in the way that he presented himself, and this is where I think Suella Braverman comes undone, on the grounds that I think that the way you put on votes and seats and the way you capture people's support is by out-reasonabling your opponents and looking like somebody who has thought about things and is not only asking the right questions, but is also trying to answer them in a way that will benefit the most number of people in society in the best possible way. And the way in which she went on television and looked and sounded like somebody who was a woman possessed on this particular issue makes the Conservative message and the message that Rishi Sunak is trying to sell to an electorate, which is that there is a danger to an incoming Labour Party or an incoming Labour government, blows it out the water. Because despite how reasonable he is, she makes the Conservative Party look like the unreasonable people in the room.
I've got to move on, but I can't resist asking you one more thing quickly, Ruth. Jenrick also said that he wouldn't have a problem if Nigel Farage wanted to join the Conservative Party again. Would you have a problem with that?
Yes, I would.
Pretty emphatic.
Me too, just while people are joining my party. No thanks. No thanks.
Well, look, let's move on to elections because Labour will be wanting to say they're on top. And I have to say, Jess and I had quite the weekend, didn't we?
We did indeed.
God, we know how to live at the West Mids count.
Oh, yeah, 13 hours in an airless conference room.
I went up at 10 a.m. I thought I'd be done and dusted on the train back at 7 p.m. Got home at 4 a.m. the next morning via a cab from Birmingham at 2 a.m. The only reason I went home was I had no clothes and no contact lens fluid. So as I said to Chris Mason, he said, "Are you going home?" And I said, "Yeah, because otherwise I'm going to wake up blind and naked," which he thought was very funny.
Oh, you saucy minx.
I know. But, I mean, Jess was there. I was there. It was meant to be straightforward. It wasn't straightforward. They were doing bundle recounts. It was really close. It felt like a momentum shift moment, Jess, when we broke the result on Sky News, which I was really chuffed about, but it was a bit squeaky bum time because it was 1,500 votes in it. And I was like, if I get this wrong as political editor, I'm a little bit done. Like, you can't call it wrong.
I'm just going to say, to see behind the curtain for a moment, I can add, and I had seen the results from the places. And admittedly, available to the public at this point was only the more conservative parts of the West Midlands, so Solihull and Walsall and Dudley. And so I'm stood there with Beth, who's like, Andy Street's 20,000 in front. And I was like, but Beth, Birmingham is 10 times the size of those places. And also Coventry has a bigger population.
Yeah, but the thing was, so we're all in Birmingham and Jess is in the big count. How many votes was it there, Jess? Like 240?
Yeah,
right. And
massive.
Jess is there with Danny, her son, who was adorable the whole day, right? He's absolutely living his best life. It was really fun. And then when the result came in, Jess was cock-a-hoot because, I don't know, Richard Parker, the Labour guy, was 14,000 votes ahead of Andy Street. She's like, I think we've edged it. Like, the room is empty. They're laying out tables for the event tomorrow, right? It's like being at a school disco at the end of the night and they've packed up and you're just there waiting for your mum to pick you up, right? And we're still there. We're still on it. And then all of the Labour lot come back in the room. And I'm like, what are you all doing? What are you all doing? Just what were you all doing? Why did you all come back in?
Genuinely, what I absolutely love is various different news organisations, including Sky.
You caused a news flash.
It was a news flash because we walked into a room. And the reason we walked in there is I literally do not know, other than we had been in an airless conference room and in the corridors for 13 hours by this point, and We just wanted a change of scenery, and we caused breaking news just by moving from one room to another.
So we call it at about 8 p.m. Labour won by 1,500 votes, right? It was nuts. It was nuts. And I actually really felt for Andy Street, because it is hard to lose, and to lose by that must really hurt. But anyway, he was very magnanimous. He came and did the rounds. And then we had to sort of run to the other side of the conference room, and Starmer had been circling all day, been at East Midlands in the morning. He stayed up to watch the football because Arsenal were playing Bournemouth. Yeah, I think it was Bournemouth. They won 3-0. And then he was waiting to come to the West Mid. So we ran to this huddle, and Jess was there. Danny was in the middle. Starmer came in. And I have to say, Jess, I don't know about you, but when I talk about a momentum shift in moments, there are moments in political campaigns where you bank the moment. Ruth, you're nodding because you know what I mean, right? I remember Hartlepool when Johnson won that by-election. It was a moment. It was a moment that you remember because it talks to a bigger narrative. Did you feel like that in the room, Jess, with the win, that it felt like a momentum shifting moment?
Yeah, I did feel like it. I mean, when you are behind the curtain and you have known the result for quite a long time, even though you can't verify it, but you are fairly certain of it, and you are talking to Keir Starmer on the phone, and he was literally like circling the Midlands, I did say to him, just go to my house. My husband will make you a drink.
He'll give you a dirty martini.
I was like, just pop in. Tom will make you a cocktail. And also, I was meant to be at a barbecue, so I offered him that as well. I was like, I'm meant to be at this barbecue, so go and have my sausage. Oh, he's a vegetarian, isn't he, Keir Starmer? I'm sure they were catered for.
I think so.
I knew I didn't trust him.
So, but it felt very like, especially because it was in my city and I was surrounded by people I know and have worked with for many, many, many years. And there were some people there who were very, very emotional, as well as Richard Parker, the candidate, who was incredibly emotional. But there were other people there, and the emotion that showed on their face wasn't just tired after 13 hours. It was sort of like, it felt like, oh my gosh, we might actually do this.
Yes. So the great thing about being the last woman standing when you're a journalist is you then get to go and interview Keir Starmer at his big rally, right? So I get to go and interview Starmer, and of course they're euphoric, but there is something else going on here, Jess, isn't there? Because the independent candidate had taken a lot of Labour votes, and that speaks to what you've been talking about, Jess. We've talked about it in the pod, the deep unhappiness in certain communities that support Labour about the Gaza situation, the Israel-Hamas war. And I asked him about that, and I got the impression that there are a lot of people in that huddle around him that did not like this question, you know. But it's the reality, isn't it? Like, how much of a factor was it in you nearly not taking the West Mids mayor? And how worried are you as an MP there about what a general election might look like if independents are taking what? You said to me, 30,000 votes you thought they picked up in the Birmingham borough?
Yeah, I mean, how worried am I about a general election? It's very, very, very hard to extrapolate this to a general election on the basis of it being a list of singular candidates and personality. However, funnily enough, I am worried about the general election in areas like mine, but I'm less worried about it because of the result that might befall people like me. I'm genuinely worried about it because of community relations. It's just about division. That's not helping the people of Gaza at all, or the people of Israel, or anywhere, certainly not helping the people of the West Midlands. And so I am very, very worried about how nasty the general election might get. And also, but I am worried about how the people who I love and live amongst and, members of my family, like, I am frightened about a loss of trust in the Labour Party, and I don't think it serves them well, but that's on us to prove to them otherwise.
I think something that's really important in elections is losers' consent. And I think that Andy Street was, as I would have always expected him to be because he's a pal of mine, a proper gent and did it in the right way. And you're right that it's a lot harder to lose something that's close than something that's miles apart, because, you know, he can think, if you look at the number of boxes across Birmingham, Coventry, West Midlands, there's 1,500 boxes. If he had one more vote in each box, he would have tied or he would have won. Like, it's that close.
And I have to say, he was so magnanimous in defeat. He would not call out the Prime Minister. He talked about coming so close to Labour in running on a campaign of, as he described it, tolerance, inclusivity and moderation. And his message to the Conservative Party, and it wouldn't surprise you, Ruth, because he's on your wing of the party, was don't go to the right after any general election, because that is not how you win, as he described it, diverse, multicultural and young cities and regions like the West Midlands and Birmingham.
And also, he wished his successor well and hoped that he'd build on the work that he'd done. And actually, that's part of the loser's consent as well, is not just saying, I'm gutted, but thank you to my team and thank you to everybody and a nice message. It's also saying, and the guy that beat me now has every authority to go on and do the best that he can.
Yeah.
Somebody should, send Trump a memo.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to say, someone needs to send Andy Street to see Donald Trump. Let's pause here. Coming up, your messages and questions. Let's ask some questions. We've got a message from Chris. What does the Labour Party have to do to win back pro-Palestinian supporters? Talking to other women my age and social group on demos, it's not just young people and the Muslim vote where this is impacting the Labour share of the vote. Look, Jess, I'll come straight to you. Starmer said, didn't he, in that answer, I am listening. I've heard what you have said. When I asked him about this losing votes because of unhappiness, what does he actually have to now do?
I think that he needs to be much clearer, because funnily enough, the Labour Party's position on the war at the moment is one that I don't find difficult to back at all. They are being very firm on arms sales. They are being very firm about the concerns about breaking of international law by Israel. They are pushing for a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire. So, there is no divergence really in the demands of the people on demos and the Labour Party. But there is this initial phase, the LBC interview that he did, where it seemed like he basically gave a blank check to Israel, which he then tried to clarify. I think that probably needs a bit more of a clarification, and they need to see more action. But also, if you're talking about the Muslim community, it isn't just about Gaza. Where I live, they feel a bit forgotten for a lot of reasons. And so what is the broader offer to those communities? And getting that across and communicating it is really important.
So some work to do for Keir Starmer. I'm sad to end this pod because we are out of time, but not out of talk. Ruth and Jess, what are you up to this weekend? Jess, you are not going to be at a count this weekend, neither am I. What are you doing instead?
I'm having a classic Beth Rigby weekend. I'm trying to spend it with my children, and we are going to watch the Eurovision Song Contest, which we do together every year, and we are supporting Switzerland, and that means we have to get a Switzerland-themed dinner. But I'm not going to allow fondue in my living room because we just recently had the floors redone.
Well, I'm also going to watch the Eurovision Song Contest, and what Angela and I do is there's a really nice Italian deli just about 10-minute walk away, and we get an Italian spread, so that's what I'm going to do.
I bloody love Eurovision, so I'll be watching that. And also, as with, it turns out, almost every other weekend of mine, I have a small child's 6th birthday party because my son has a better social life than I do.
Love it. We are all on Eurovision this weekend, and who wouldn't be? And remember, you can WhatsApp voice note us on 07934 200 444 or send an email to electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. Thank you for listening. Enjoy your weekends. Bye.
Bye.